Part 46. The Liu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 451. Chapter 451. The student subject teacher is looking for you. The night wind was biting her face, and Jongwon couldn't help but shrink her face into her clothes. Luzes who noticed it and stopped to pull up her zipper. Then he put his little hands into his pockets. Jongwon sniffed and asked, "When will the first snow fall?" "It has already fallen in other places," Jongwon said, stretching out the other hand at Luzes who wasn't holding and testing the wind. Luzes who glared at her, then she stuck out her tongue with an embarrassed smile, took it back and hid it in her pocket. "It will rain, but it will be late." Luzes who raised his head and glanced at the sky. "The flowers have all faded." Jongwon looked at the desolation in the garden, and the petals had all rotted into the soil. "It will be better again in the spring," Luzes who said. Jongwon sighed and didn't speak for a few minutes. Not long after leaving, Luzes who felt too cold, so he led the people back. "I don't know what happened to him just now, but he wanted to take people out for a walk. It's better to wash up and go to bed early." Jongwon rushed into the room and rubbed her hands. Luzes who took a step forward, wrapped his big palm around her little face and said, "I'll warm you up first, and then go to bed when you're warm." "Okay," Jongwon replied resoundingly. When the two passed by the living room, they saw Lin 11 and Lu Lin sitting on the sofa, looking like they were watching a good show. "Look at how cold you two are. It's so windy that you both went out for a walk at night," Lu Lin said with gloating. "That's it. How good would it be to learn from us?" Lin 11 also laughed at them. Luzes who and Jongwon looked at each other and then rushed upstairs. They didn't want to talk to these two old children. "Where are you going to sleep tonight?" Luzes who asked when he walked to the door of the room. Jongwon was lying on the door with a pitiful look, blinking and saying, "Can you bear to leave me alone in a room on such a cold day?" "I think our house isn't cold, right?" Luzes who looked at her. "The heater in their house is fully turned on." If Jongwon still finds it too cold, that's obviously a lie. You see, a thin and frail person must be cold. "No matter how warm the house is, I will feel cold." Jongwon stopped lying on the door and lay on Luzes who. Half of her body was leaning on Luzes who's body. Luzes who couldn't do anything to her. He put his hand on her shoulders and took her back to the room. He said, "Go take a shower and change clothes first. After washing, take your quilt and come to me." Although their relationship is clear now, it doesn't seem right to sleep in the same bed all the time, so let her bring her own quilt. Jongwon didn't think much, nodded and entered the bathroom. After Jongwon entered, Luzes who also returned to his room. He also wanted to take a hot bath to relieve the fatigue of the day. Although this night seemed to be going well, no one knew that something was happening and going on. The two went to school as usual the next day and let go of their hands when they were still some way from the door. Everything seemed calm in the morning, and everyone sat together for lunch at noon, but what happened in the afternoon caught people off guard. The first class in the afternoon was physical education. Not long after class started, a strange senior boy ran in from outside. Everyone and the perverted physical education teacher all looked at him. "What are you doing? Which class are you in?" asked the physical education teacher. The boy held his knees and took a few breaths but did not answer the teacher's words. Instead, he said directly, "Look for Jongwon, the student subject teacher." In an instant, everyone turned their attention to Jongwon. Jongwon pointed at herself with a confused look on her face and asked, "Looking for Jongwon? Looking for me?" Student science teacher. End of this chapter. The Liu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 452. Chapter 452, Being Caught by Classmates. In an instant, everyone turned their attention to Jongwon. Jongwon pointed at herself with a confused look on her face and asked, "Looking for Jongwon? Looking for me?" Student science teacher. What happened to you? The teacher and Sujiaojiao asked almost at the same time, but one asked in a loud voice, while the other asked almost cautiously in his ear. Zhang Wanan looked confused. I don't know, do they have the same name? The physical education teacher was confused about the situation now, but when he heard that it was the student subject teacher, he didn't dare to neglect him. He urged Zhang Wanan impatiently, hurry up, we have to come back to class soon. Zhang Wanan was also a little confused, so she had no choice but to follow the boy. Brother Shui, why is the student subject teacher looking for me? Zhang Wanan tried to find out. After all, she was not famous in the school. How could the teacher know about her and suddenly look for her? Who knows, the senior also didn't know. He shook his head and said, I'm just a messenger, so I don't know either. Zhang Wanan nodded and had no choice but to follow behind. When she was about to reach the student department, Zhang Wanan suddenly felt as if her feet were filled with lead. It was heavy and she couldn't walk after all. The student department was a very scary place, and she didn't know why she was being looked for this time. She was afraid. The feeling amplifies. She is not a bold person either. She just follows her senior brother and falls behind as she goes. The senior student looked back and saw that she was strangely far away from him, so he waved and said, hurry up, the teacher will be angry soon. Zhang Wanan was stunned, then cautiously moved a few steps over and asked, are you not angry yet? I don't know, but I'm sure you'll be angry when you go in. Shuiji shrugged helplessly. Zhang Wanan rolled his eyes helplessly, thinking that he would be dead no matter what this time. She wanted to take a few deep breaths at the door to think for a while, but for some reason the schoolmate quickly knocked on the door. It didn't matter that he knocked on the door, but Zhang Wanan was so frightened that she almost couldn't breathe. Teacher, Zhang Wanan is here. Senior brother stood at the door and said, reaching out and pulling Zhang Wanan. Zhang Wanan gritted his teeth and thought that if he didn't do anything, he would never stop doing it. Since he was here anyway, he should just leave as if it were a ghost gate. She walked to the door, bent down slightly and shouted, hello, teacher. When she raised her head to see the situation inside the door, she felt that she must be dead today, because Lu Zizhu was standing there looking at her with a heavy gaze. Come in. Teacher Lu glanced at her. Zhang Wanan glanced at Lu Zizhu and moved in fearfully. Hurry up, Teacher Lu glanced at her again and yelled. Zhang Wanan was frightened by her voice and trembled, but she still had the courage to raise her feet and walk over. After all, she thought that she should not be embarrassed in front of Lu Zizhu. And Lu Zizhu couldn't help but frown when he heard Teacher Lu yelling at Zhang Wanan. Teacher, do you have a problem with me? Zhang Wanan asked cautiously. In fact, even if Teacher Lu didn't say anything, she knew what it was the moment she saw Lu Zizhu. It's so obvious, why do I need to say it? Teacher Liu's eyes widened in excitement. Zhang Wanan lowered his head and stuck out his tongue. There was no need to say anything else. It was just that the two of them were completely exposed. Do you really think that teachers are all fools? I've said it several times overtly and covertly, but why don't you listen? Do you not understand the hint or what? Do you have to let your classmates find out? Lao Lu said and put the laptop, turning the two of them to look at the screen. Zhang Wanan and Lu Zizhu both felt incredible when they saw the photos on the screen. Lu Zizhu's brows furrowed tightly at this moment. He stretched out his hand and said to Lao Lu, give me the mouse. Please give me a vote. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 453. Chapter 453. Returning home and reflecting. Zhang Wanan and Lu Zizhu both felt incredible when they saw the photos on the screen. Lu Zizhu's brows furrowed tightly at this moment. He stretched out his hand and said to Lao Lu, give me the mouse. Although Lao Lu was helpless, he obediently handed the mouse to Lu Zizhu. Lu Zizhu clicked the mouse, changing the photos one by one. He and Zhang Wanan read them one by one. All the photos were taken when they were holding hands or being slightly intimate. The photos are from a long time ago and some are from the recent period. Who took the photo? Lu Zizhu raised his head and asked after reading. Teacher Lu lay down on the back of his chair and said, I don't know about this either. Someone reported it anonymously. Report anonymously. Yes, if you weren't too high profile, someone would find out and report you. What's going on with your children now? Have I warned you, overtly or secretly, to study hard? But how come this mentality is so twisted? Old Lu said. He sat up and patted the table excitedly. Then he glared at Zhang Wanan and said, What grade are you in? How old are you? Is it the time to fall in love now? Do you really not know what you are doing? And you are not young anymore. If she is not sensible, you are not sensible either, he said to Lu Zizhu again. Lu Zizhu took a step forward and blocked Zhang Wanan behind him, saying, I'm not sensible, but I understand that I like her. I understand too. Zhang Wanan spoke from behind Lu Zizhu in a voice as loud as a mosquito. Lao Lu was so angry that his heart ached. He pointed to the last photo on the computer screen and said, You still have this kind of virtue after all this? Do you have to make it public and let everyone know that the good student Lu Zizhu is in love? Lu Zizhu focused on the last photo, which was the one they were secretly photographed while standing at the door yesterday morning. It was also when he discovered something was wrong, but when he turned around, he saw nothing. It's no different if everything comes to you than if it's made public, Lu Zizhu asked, raising his eyebrows. You, Lu Zizhu? Do you still want your bright future? Teacher Lu asked loudly. Lu Zizhu looked at him and suddenly smiled and said, Does this mean I won't have a bright future? I haven't delayed my studies, right? I'm still fighting for honor for the school, right? Teacher Lu was speechless by Lu Zizhu. The office entered an eerie state of silence. After a while, old Lu sighed and said, Since this matter has been brought to the forefront, I have to punish you. According to the regulations, I will call your parents and you will go home and reflect. Now that the matter has been made clear, we can no longer turn a blind eye, otherwise we may make a bigger fuss, and punishing them can be regarded as a piece of advice to the two of them. Let them keep a low profile and a low profile in the future. After speaking, old Lu glared at Zhang Wanan fiercely, as if this incident was entirely Zhang Wanan's fault. Zhang Wanan carefully shrank behind Lu Zizhu again, for fear that she would be eaten by old Lu in the next second. After all, she abducted Lu Zizhu, who was the most honorable person in the entire school. Lu Zizhu reached out and held Zhang Wanan's hand from behind, indicating that she didn't need to be afraid. Teacher Lu quickly called Lu Lin and Lin 11, and after the two came to explain the situation, they walked out of the office. The two went home to reflect for a week, but considering Lu Zizhu's status, they announced that he had gone home sick, otherwise it would cause unnecessary impact on the school. Zhang Wanan went home to reflect for the same reason. Zhang Wanan was sitting in the car feeling unhappy, but Lu Zizhu didn't care. It's okay, just go home and rest, and you will be a good man again in a week, Lu Zizhu said to Zhang Wanan. Zhang Wanan raised his head and looked at Lu Zizhu, and soon tears began to well up in his eyes. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 454. Chapter 454, Elope. Zhang Wanan raised his head and looked at Lu Zizhu, and soon tears began to well up in his eyes. Lu Zizhu quickly held her face and said, Don't cry. Hold it back. If you cry, you won't be beautiful anymore. Zhang Wanan nodded and listened to Lu Zizhu's words and closed her eyes to hold it back, but who knew that the tears would completely flow out as soon as she closed her eyes. Lu Zizhu quickly went to wipe them away, but Zhang Wanan could no longer hold back the tears and burst into tears. Shouldn't we be like this? I'm still young and ignorant, so I've delayed you. Jiangwanan lay on Lu Zizhu's chest and cried. Those are what Lao Lu taught her just now. Lu Zizhu felt very distressed when he heard her cry. He stretched out his hand to hug her tightly and patted her back and said, "You didn't delay me, nor were you ignorant. We are very good together. There is no delay in studying or anything else." However, Lao Lu has nothing to say. Really? Jiang Wanan raised her head and looked at Lu Zizhu with her big moist eyes. Really, you don't blame yourself, you don't need to blame yourself, isn't it just for a week, it's no big deal, let's just use this week to have fun, okay? What are you playing for? Jiang Wanan asked sobbing. You can play whatever you want, wherever it's fun. We also need to study. Jiang Wanan said that she was taking the initiative to study. Okay, study, study hard, and when the time comes, you will get good results, and tell Lao Lu that we have not delayed our studies. Jiang Wanan nodded vigorously, and she secretly made up her mind to study hard in the future. Jiang Wanan was still sobbing softly in Lu Zizhu's arms. Lu Zizhu looked out the window and remembered the photo he had just seen in the office. There was something fishy about that photo. It wasn't some classmates who caught him and reported him anonymously, but an acquaintance. Because several of the photos were taken near or inside their home, no classmates knew about his home, and no one would follow him to take photos. So Lu Zizhu concluded that this was done by an acquaintance, and he already had a candidate in mind after careful screening. Jiang Wanan was sobbing quietly in the back. Lin 11 and Lu Lin, who were sitting in front, felt unhappy. Maybe they decided on their relationship too early, which led to what happened today. It wasn't that they regretted it, they just looked at the little girl. The girl is really uncomfortable looking like this. But they have made it clear to Teacher Lu, and it is estimated that nothing will happen again. After arriving home, Jiang Wanan had cried herself to sleep. Lu Zizhu looked down at her and hugged her out of the car. After laying Jiang Wan down, he took his mobile phone and walked to the balcony to make a call. The call was quickly answered and a careless voice came from the other side. "What's the matter, Lao Lu?" "Don't call me Lao Lu," Lu Zizhu warned. This was not suitable for his age. He felt that this title should be more suitable for Lu Lin. Okay, don't shout. If you have something to say, I'll go play ball in a moment," Gu Jinchu said, and the sound of hitting the ball could be heard over there. "I haven't been going to school for a while recently, please help me pay attention to someone." "Why don't you come to school?" "Who are you paying attention to?" Gu Jinchu was a little surprised. "Go elope and keep an eye on Avril Lavigne." "Elope, it's quite romantic." Gu Jinchu smiled and selectively ignored the second half of what Lu Zizhu said. "Did you hear what I told you?" Lu Zizhu ignored him and asked. "Over there." Gu Jinchu grinned and scratched his hair, and after a while he said, "You have to give me a reason, right?" "I'm just asking if you can help me, I'll have a meal after everything is done." Lu Zizhu began to threaten and induce. "I'm not that kind of person." "Is it that difficult to just ask you to help keep an eye on it?" Lu Zizhu asked. Then I heard Gu Jinchu sigh and say, "I know." After hanging up the phone, Gu Jinchu vaguely felt that something was happening between them. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 455. Chapter 455. It's time to meet that person. The two of them had already made plans for the past 7 days. They just wanted to go out for a walk when they had time. However, at Jiang Wanan's request, they spent most of the time at home studying. She didn't want to delay Lu Zizhu, nor did she want to hold him back. Asterisk. The matter between Lu Zizhu and Jiang Wanan seemed to be over, but in fact it was not. On the third day after they left school, rumors gradually began to spread in the school. An event that not many people knew about happened a long time ago, but now rumors are spreading. It seems that this link was added temporarily because it did not meet the expectations of the so-called anonymous contributor. Rumors gradually spread around the school, but Lu Zizhu and Zhang Wanan didn't know anything about it at home. Fortunately, they received a call from Gu Jinchu in the afternoon. Lu Zizhu was shopping with Zhang Wanan to buy stationery when he received the call. He took a look and wanted to hang up, but he remembered what he had entrusted to him a few days ago and picked up the call. "What's wrong? Did you and Zhang Wanan go home to reflect?" Gu Jinchu asked seriously over there. Lu Zizhu frowned and told Zhang Wanan to go shopping by himself first. Then he walked aside and talked on the phone seriously. What happened at school? He did not answer Gu Jinchu's question directly, but asked him in return. "I don't know who is spreading some news, that is, about you and Zhang Wanan. I think you can guess what they are talking about without me telling you." Lu Zizhu said Of course he could guess it, otherwise Gu Jinchu's first sentence on the phone wouldn't have been like that. It's time for him to meet that person. "How is Avril Lavigne doing lately?" Lu Zizhu asked. Gu Jinchu said with a task, "She's so elusive, I don't know what she's doing. Her grades dropped a lot after yesterday's test paper was handed out, so she was scolded by the teacher." Lu Zizhu nodded, "I understand. Are you doubting her?" Gu Jinchu suddenly woke up. Lu Zizhu didn't intend to hide it from him, so he admitted directly, "I'll make an appointment with her later." "Do you want me to follow you? I'm afraid you might start a fight." Gu Jinchu was a little worried. After all, they were all friends. "If you don't know how to fight, there might be a fight," Lu Zizhu said, looking in Zhang Wanan's direction. "Avril Lavigne has reached his bottom line. The things she did before were already too much, but she didn't expect that this time it would be even more extreme. She was already going crazy. Then, what should I do if you break up?" Gu Jinchu suddenly panicked. "It's up to you." Lu Zizhu finished the sentence and hung up the phone. After hanging up the phone, Lu Zizhu walked up to Zhang Wanan and took the small basket from her hand. He looked at it and saw that the little girl had almost picked it out. "Is something wrong?" Zhang Wanan asked him about the phone call just now. Lu Zizhu opened his mouth and changed his words to something else. "Gu Jinchu comes to see me tonight if he has something to do. I will take you back later. Just wait patiently. I can't take you with me this time." He concealed something about what Zhang Wanan said, and did not tell Zhang Wanan about the school. Zhang Wanan raised her head and glanced at him suspiciously but saw nothing. She nodded obediently and didn't make any fuss. When Lu Zizhu went to pay, he suddenly remembered another thing. He wondered if the school affairs would spread to Zhang Wanan's ears from other people's mouths, namely Su Xiao, He Chiu and Zhang Baihui. He thought for a while and then handed the money to Zhang Wanan and said, "You pay first, and I'll make a call." He walked over there and called Gu Jinchu again. Gu Jinchu failed once, but he hit Gu Jinchu again and picked up the fight. Before he could open his mouth, Gu Jinchu said in a face-to-face manner without fear of death, "Hang up the phone before you finish speaking. Who do you think I am? I'll let you taste the feeling of being hung up on." After that, he hung up again. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 456. Chapter 456. She is a simple girl. Hang up the phone before you finish speaking. Who do you think I am? I'll let you taste the feeling of being hung up on. After that, he hung up again. Lu Zizhu took the phone from his ear and took a look at it. He thought he was crazy if he didn't see anyone. He counted 3 seconds in his mind before the phone rang again. Gu Jinchu called back again. Lu Zizhu answered with a cold snort, and an impatient voice came from the other side, "Tell me, what else do you want from me? Go and tell He Chiu and the others not to tell Anan about what happened at school," Lu Zizhu said directly without beating around the bush. Gu Jinchu was stunned for a moment before saying, "You mean, to hide it first?" Well, we'll take care of it tonight, and we won't have those words when we go back. I don't want her to study under pressure, Luzes who said, and looked back at Jongwanan. She was queuing up to pay. There was a little girl behind her and two people were talking. Jongwanan was smiling nicely and seemed to be teasing the child. Luzes who smiled, thinking that this was probably a child teasing a child, right? Just like when he teased Jongwanan when he was little. The little girl's life should be filled with laughter and laughter every day without any worries. She should not be overwhelmed by some things, so he wanted to protect her. Gu Jinchu over there understood it, and he said, "Okay, my brother over here will get it for you, and you can have a good talk with Avril tonight." Luzes who unexpectedly thanked Gu Jinchu. The people over there were so flattered that they almost jumped with excitement. Luzes who smiled silently and hung up the phone. Jongwanan had already paid and was walking towards her. Before she came over, Luzes who sent Avril a message on his mobile phone, which read, "See you tonight." The message came back quickly. Luzes who looked down and did not reply directly because Jongwanan had already arrived. He took the things from Jongwanan's hand and said, "You will go home later. Mom will be back very early tonight, and I won't be gone for a long time." "I know, just go and do your business," Jongwanan said sensibly. Luzes who smiled and took her out. The driver was already waiting. Luzes who put her directly into the car. When they were far away, he turned around and left. Luzes who found a cafe nearby, and after sitting down, he began to reply to Avril Lavigne's message. Avril Lavigne's answer was crisp and concise, with only 4 words, time and place. Now Luzes who replied, then sent a location. Luzes who didn't wait too long, because Avril came very quickly. She smiled brightly when she came. She probably didn't expect what was going to happen next. After sitting down, she even ordered a cup of coffee in a good mood. "What do you want from me?" she smiled and looked straight at Luzes who with her face raised. Luzes who took a sip of coffee and heard her speak again before he opened his mouth. "Where's Anan? Didn't you bring her?" she said and pretended to look around, but in fact she was happy inside. She had been thinking about this kind of time alone for two people for who knows how long. She was also very happy that Luzes who took the initiative to find her this time. She is a simple girl and should not sit at this table with you. After Luzes who said this, the coffee was served. But at this moment, Avril was no longer in the mood to drink coffee. Her face darkened and she no longer looked at Luzes who with her chin raised. Instead, she put down her hands and frowned and asked, "What do you mean? Who is not innocent? Don't you know what you did?" Luzes who looked at her. Luzes whose eyes were full of scrutiny. Avril couldn't help but flinch as soon as she looked into his eyes. She avoided Luzes whose gaze and asked uncomfortably, What did I do?" "Avril, I still hope you will admit it yourself," Luzes who said. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 457. Chapter 457. The Clown. "Avril, I still hope you will admit it yourself," Luzes who said. He still took into account that little bit of pity. Avril leaned back in her chair and shook her head with a smile. "I don't know what I did, and I didn't do anything." Her smile was fake, like a forced smile, and she looked around uncomfortably while speaking, which was obviously a lie. Luzes who squinted at her for a few seconds. Avril was in a lot of torment during these seconds. If she were a gopher, she would probably make a hole and hide in it. "You won't tell?" Luzes who asked coldly. "What did I say? I didn't do anything. What did I say?" "Ha, it's ridiculous." She stubbornly kept a sense of luck and even laughed at Luzes who and said he was ridiculous. She regarded Luzes who as a clown, but she forgot that she was the clown. Luzes who smiled coldly, "If you don't tell me, I will." At that moment, Avril felt like her brain was exploding with a boom. The surroundings were very quiet, but she felt that her mind was very confused. Luzes who looked at the change in her expression and felt that this woman was hypocritical and ridiculous. She was just like she was when she was a child. She was never willing to admit that she had done bad things, but her guilt was clearly visible on her face. If there is a suitable person by her side now, then all her crimes will be pinned on others with excellent reasons. But now, except for Luzes who, an acquaintance, all the others around her are strangers. She can't just drag a stranger over and force someone to be charged. Luzes who looked at her for a few more seconds. Avril's eyes were wandering, but she refused to admit it. Luzes who took another sip of coffee and slowly said, "Were you the one who made the photos and some of the things that are going around in the school?" "What picture? What mess? I don't understand what you are saying." Avril held up the coffee and wanted to take a sip, but when her hand shook, half of the coffee spilled, so she put it down in a panic and picked up a tissue. "I'm going to the bathroom," Avril said, already getting up and walking towards the bathroom. Luzes who looked at her fleeing back and did not call out to her, but smiled coldly. He believed that Avril would reappear in front of him in less than a minute, and she would have no chance to run away on the excuse of going to the bathroom. "Open." Luzes who waited quietly and ordered another cup of coffee and placed it next to him. The minute is about to come, and as expected, Avril is back again, with her head lowered like a prisoner, but she is not back by herself, and is followed by Gu Jinchug. I still want to thank Gu Jinchug for the stubbornness. I was afraid that they had quarreled and sent a few information to urge Luzes who to tell him about their address. Luzes who helplessly sent him the position. Just when Avril was running away, Luzes whose cell phone on the table lit up. Gu Jinchug said that he had arrived, so he ordered a new cup of coffee and placed it next to him. "Here we come," Luzes who said calmly, but looked at Avril with sharp eyes. Avril was huddled behind Gu Jinchug at this moment, not daring to raise her head. "Sit down, I've ordered you something to drink." Luzes who pointed to the coffee on the table with his chin. Gu Jinchug nodded and reached back to pull Avril, pulling her to sit down. After Avril sat down and faced the two people, she felt that the atmosphere was very depressing. Now she only dared to lower her head and did not dare to speak. "How dare you do it but not say it? How dare you do these things? You dared to go to my house and take pictures. Avril, you are brave enough. Things didn't go as you expected and you started spreading remarks in the school again, right? How on earth did you become like this?" Luzes who asked her. Gu Jinchug glanced at Luzes who and then at Avril and sighed without saying anything. He just wanted to keep an eye on these two people and not fight. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 458. Chapter 458, I wonder what it will be like to see each other again. Gu Jinchug glanced at Luzes who and then at Avril and sighed without saying anything. He just wanted to keep an eye on these two people and not fight. Avril Lavigne kept her head down and said nothing. Just when Luzes who was about to lose his patience, Avril finally raised her head and spoke. She smiled, a little miserably, and said, "I just don't want you to be nice, I'm just jealous, and I just don't want Jongwon to be well, so I make things difficult for her everywhere. There is no reason, it's just envy, jealousy, and hatred. The reason for this is because of you two. I admit everything. I did everything. Are you satisfied?" She is a little crazy. Luzes who looked at her and asked, "Do you know the consequences of doing this?" "I know, I don't want friends anymore. It's fine to be alone." Avril seemed to have relaxed after saying this. She lay down lazily on the back of the chair and looked at the two people. "How did you become like this?" Gu Jinchug couldn't help asking before Luzes who could speak. "You ask me? What else could it be?" "Jealousy," Avril said very indifferently. "Everyone can see that I like you, but as for you, you only care about making love to that little childhood sweetheart of yours. How old is she? What does she know?" What do you know? Can you understand how much I like you? It's a match made in heaven. Avril was already a little excited when she said this. Gu Jinchu looked at her frowning tightly and whispered, crazy, really crazy. Yeah, it's crazy. If it weren't for Lu Zizhu, I might not have returned to China in this life. But because of him, I came back. I thought I would burst into tears when we met, but when I came back, I saw the little guy next to her. My intuition told me we're hummed. I also thought about giving up, but then I felt that I shouldn't give up easily and I should do something, so I did these things. I know it's dirty, but I feel very comfortable. She finished speaking with a false smile on her lips. Looking at her like this, Gu Jinchu felt that she was finished, that she had destroyed herself. You should know that Anan is my bottom line. You have already touched my bottom line. Avril, you can go back to your hometown. It is best not to let me see you in this city again in this life, Lu Zizhu said. Means that it's time for Avril to return to country M. I have contacted your father. He is very disappointed with what you have done. Avril, be a good person. After Lu Zizhu finished speaking, he stood up and left without waiting for her to react. When Lu Zizhu left, Avril felt as if all her strength had been drained away from her body. She lay exhausted on the back of the chair and laughed sarcastically. She was originally the least liked child in the family, and her father definitely didn't like the things she did. She was finished. She didn't destroy others but destroyed herself. Gu Jinchu looked at Avril, who was slumped on the back of the chair, and said, "You are so disappointing." "Yes, disappointed," she murmured. She is also disappointed with herself. She has not accomplished enough but has failed more than she should. This is probably why she is not liked. Gu Jinchu wanted to say something else, but he opened his mouth but nothing came out. He stood up and walked to Avril, patted his shoulder and said, "Okay, I'll find you later." Avril was stunned for a moment and turned to look at Gu Jinchu, but he had already strode away. Will he come to see me? She has bullied him since she was a child. Everyone else is annoying her. Doesn't Gu Jinchu bother her? Avril thought blankly. She didn't know what Gu Jinchu was thinking, but she just kept his words in her heart silently. I don't know what it will be like to say goodbye. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 459. Chapter 459, Dual Personality. As a child, I also have to take care of an older child like you. Zhang Wanan. When Lu Zizhu returned home, Zhang Wanan was still studying seriously in the room. Lu Zizhu smiled and walked over to take a look, only to find that the little girl was holding on. She was already a little drowsy. Get some sleep, and then study again, Lu Zizhu patted her head and said. Zhang Wanan closed her eyes and then opened them. She turned around and took one of Lu Zizhu's hands and said, "Are you back?" "I'm back," Lu Zizhu said. Zhang Wanan raised her head and smiled silly at him, then suddenly lowered her head and smelled his hand seriously. Lu Zizhu suddenly felt funny and amused when he saw her frowning and sniffing hard. "What do you smell?" "It's like a puppy," Lu Zizhu said, and then reached out to rub her head with his other hand. Zhang Wanan raised her head and pouted her lips and said, "You secretly ate delicious food. Your hands smell like roast chicken." Lu Zizhu frowned and smelled his hand. "Really? I didn't." Zhang Wanan hummed and whispered, "Liar," and then folded her arms and looked out the window and ignored him. Lu Zizhu looked at her greedy look and smiled. He put his hand over again and said, "Smell it, there really isn't one." Who would have thought that Zhang Wanan didn't smell it this time, but grabbed his hand and bit it lightly. She opened her mouth and said angrily, "I told you to go eat delicious food secretly without bringing it to me. You stinky man." Loses who looked at the small shallow tooth marks on his wrist and smiled helplessly and said, I didn't eat delicious food secretly, but I bought roast chicken and brought it to you. Huh, Jongwanan looked back at him in surprise, did you buy it for me? Yes, it's downstairs, but some kids thought it was mine and bit me, Loses who said, raising his hand intentionally or unintentionally. Jongwanan immediately put on a flattering expression and moved closer. She grabbed Loses who's hand, put it on her cheek and rubbed it gently. Does it hurt? Oh, that kid is so ignorant. She frowned tightly as she spoke, as if it was someone else who bit Loses who just now. Loses who rolled his eyes, thinking that this little girl's face changed so quickly in the movie. Can you take this kid like me to eat roast chicken? Jongwanan asked with a wink. Loses who pretended not to hear and looked out the window, just like Jongwanan's indifferent look just now. Seeing that he ignored her, Jongwanan moved forward again. Is that okay? I'm better behaved than that kid who bit you. Loses who laughed angrily at her. He stretched out his hand and pinched her tender little face and said, Anan, if you act like this, I'll think you have a dual personality. Wash your hands and I'll take you down to eat roast chicken, Loses who said. Jongwanan jumped up happily and pulled Loses who to wash his hands. She said, I, a little kid, have to take care of a big kid like you. Loses who smiled, thinking that he was sensible, but he hoped that she was not there for the roast chicken he bought. Jongwanangzan finished eating half of the roast chicken with satisfaction. Loses who watched and helped her prepare it, but he didn't take a bite. By the time Jongwanan finished eating, there was not much meat left, but the little girl pointed at it as if she had just remembered him and said, you should eat too. Loses who was helpless, thinking that this guy was so kind to him, even if there were only bones left, he still couldn't forget to let him eat. Loses who shook his head, just eat it. Jongwanan wiped his hands and mouth, and then said slowly, you must have eaten it secretly, otherwise why didn't you eat it? I'll eat, Loses who said, picking up the remaining chicken bones. He swore that he would be a good person in the future and only eat a few mouthfuls of meat as soon as he started eating, so that Jongwanan would not misunderstand him and he would not have to eat the poor chicken bones. Please vote, my dears. End of this chapter. The Liu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 460. Chapter 460. Her man. He swore that he would be a good person in the future and only eat a few mouthfuls of meat as soon as he started eating, so that Jongwanan would not misunderstand him and he would not have to eat the poor chicken bones. Jongwan was satisfied after eating the roast chicken. She sat on the chair and watched quietly. If she hadn't been too full, she thought she would have been able to lick all the bones clean. Are you going to eat when your parents come back soon? Jongwanan reached out and poked Loses who and asked. Eat. He didn't even take a few bites. He would be hungry if he didn't eat at night. Okay, I won't eat. I'm too full, Jongwanan said and burped. Loses who glanced at the bones on the table and felt strange. Asterisk. The two people who had been reflecting well at home finally returned to school in the new week. The two separated in a low-key manner when they walked into the school. Loses who was satisfied that he did not hear any random remarks, so Jongwanan would not be worried about some things. Moreover, he had already talked to her friends and would not talk about what happened in the school. He also asked them to pretend that they had heard about Jongwanan's return home for the past 7 days. It's her who's sick. So when Jongwanan came, they didn't ask much, but there were a few more people in the class who looked at her strangely, but Jongwanan didn't pay attention. Jongwanan hasn't seen that annoying Avril since returning to school. She didn't want to care at first, but she couldn't help but ask Loses who out of curiosity. After all, they were in the same class. Where is Avril? I haven't seen her recently, Jongwanan asked. What, miss her? Loses who teased her. Jongwanan rolled her eyes and said, no, I just asked casually. I haven't seen her for several days. Oh, I'm back to country M, Loses who replied calmly. Ah, you went back to country M? When did it happen? Zhang Wanan looked surprised. We don't know. How could you know? Gu Jinshu jumped out of nowhere and took the ball and sat next to Zhang Wanan. After thinking about it, he stood up and walked around to Loses who. Zhang Wanan. Who is more scary, she or Loses who? Why don't you dare to sit next to her? You don't know, Zhang Wanan asked again. I don't know. Loses who and Gu Jinshu lied to Zhang Wanan at the same time. Zhang Wanan didn't ask any more questions, nodded and said nothing. You haven't seen me playing basketball, have you? Loses who asked suddenly and changed the topic. Zhang Wanan looked at him and shook his head, indeed not. Loses who smiled and said, want to see it? Zhang Wanan looked in the direction of the basketball court. There were all energetic young people sweating on the court. She suddenly wanted to know what Loses who was like playing, so she nodded vigorously. Wait, I'll go play after school in the afternoon, Loses who said. There were fewer people after school in the afternoon. It was not that he was afraid of being seen, it was just that he only wanted Zhang Wanan to see him selfishly and didn't want too many people to see him. Otherwise there will be another peach blossom, and the little girl will be jealous when the time comes, which is not good. Zhang Wanan and Gu Jinshu looked at him at the same time. Gu Jinshu was obviously more surprised and his eyes widened. Brother, you actually want to play ball? How rare, Gu Jinshu said excitedly, patting his shoulder vigorously. Loses who glanced at his clapping hands and asked, is it weird? Gu Jinshu took back his hand and nodded seriously. It was strange, too strange, but it didn't seem too strange, because the call was for a little girl. I haven't played for a long time, let's try it this afternoon, Loses who said. Okay. The matter was settled as soon as the two high-fived each other. Zhang Wanan raised her head and squinted against the light to look at Loses who. Suddenly she felt that this man was so outstanding. He was indeed Zhang Wanan's man. End of this chapter.